Hi, everybody. Welcome to Design Dialogue. This is actually the second time that I'm hosting, so it's kind of amazing for me. Thank you very much for tuning in. I'd like to start by just discussing a little bit about the amazing guests we have today. We're going to be talking to Deem Journal and two of its co-founders, Goteh and Marquise Stillwell. Deem Journal is actually founded by three people, so I invited all three. Alice Granduit is not joining us today, but I just want everyone to know that she was invited as well. Yeah, let's just begin. So Deem Journal is a new biannual publication and a platform that's concerned with the design of design and the presentation of design as social practice that dignifies the experiences and priorities of the systematically marginalized. It's really interesting because to form a new magazine at this time when magazines are closing, I think is a very interesting choice. And I'd like to just read what other magazines have to say about Deem Journal. Forbes says, the vision for the publication is exciting. The immersive nature of the publication draws readers into each conversation and breaks down the boundaries and limitations which have been built from existing spheres, highlighting a roadmap which explores the diversity of design as process. Plans to host events and interact with communities across the globe is a prospect the team are keen to begin. What Deem Journal offers is a refreshing perspective, which I urge everyone to engage with. So that's kind of a great introduction. So firstly, I think congratulations are in order. If I'm not mistaken, Deem Journal turned 1 not so long ago.
Yes.
So, yeah,
Thank
congratulations, you guys. I think that's a great accomplishment. But let's talk about where you're calling in from.
Yeah, this is Marquise, and I'm in New York City. I'm right in the middle of Manhattan right now.
All right.
Use the noise if you hear
it. And this is New. I am in South Central LA.
Okay. And I just found out that Alice, who used to live in LA, now lives in Copenhagen.
Yes. Yep. She's in Copenhagen. Yeah.
Okay. So this is a really international group. And so maybe we should begin with a little background on each of you. Alice describes herself as a cultural researcher and designer working at the intersections of community engagement, education, and urbanism. She's also a self-confessed Afrofuturist. Let's see, Marquise is the founder and principal of OpenBox, a people-centered creative agency that focuses on improving the lives of people through extensive business design work, deep resources for design research and innovation, or film. New is a Liberian-born refugee, designer, strategist, creative director, and social practitioner. And New, your studio
is Room for Magic.
Room for Magic.
Yeah.
I like that. I like the relationship of magic to design.
Yeah.
Magic sometimes, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's Alice and I's studio, and our titles are Fruition Magicians.
Okay. I'm calling in from Berea, Kentucky. I'm down here at Berea College. So this isn't my normal background, but these are actually brooms behind me, which is it's beautiful. It's a beautiful backdrop of craft here at Berea. This is Deem Journal, everyone. This is the first issue. Designing for Dignity is the subtitle if you can't read it there. And this is the back page, right? Exploring design as social practice. So let's begin, you guys, with how the three of you guys came together to create Deem.
Cool, I can kick that off. So it really started with a chance meeting, not even a chance meeting, a purposeful meeting between Marquise and I. So Alice and I have a background. We've been best friends for, I think, yesterday she said 14 years. And we've worked together in many different capacities. And there was a moment where I switched career paths and moved more closer into the world of design and really reframing my understanding of design. And as I reapproached that, I went to grad school at Parsons. They had a program called Strategic Design and Management. And prior to starting that program, Marquise was actually a speaker at one of the series. I unfortunately did not attend the series, but I did my Googles and found Marquise's contact. And I reached out to him blindly via LinkedIn to set up some time to talk, because I was coming from the world of brand, from advertisement, and I was really looking towards this new world of design that once I got there, I realized it wasn't even a new world. It was the same world that I had always been in. It just had different names. And so I was really looking for someone else that at least I can start to have conversations with. Well, what is design? What does design mean? Especially what does design mean for Black people? And so Marquise and I met when he used to have his practice in the Meatpacking District, and we hit it off. And from there, we started working on projects while I was in my grad program, and I became a fellow at his studio, Open Box. And yeah. And so from me being a fellow at Open Box, Marquise and I grew our relationship. And unfortunately, but fortunately, I made the decision to move to San Francisco to take an advertising job, because they told me they wanted to infuse human-centered design and research into their offerings, which wasn't true because they didn't understand what it was. They just saw the buzzwords.
That was kind of the moment of those buzzwords, huh?
Yeah.
How long ago was that? Just to give us a sense of the timeline.
I won that thing. That was like 2015. Yeah, I think that was about like 2015. Okay. Yeah, in that time frame. And I remember Marquise and I having a conversation where he's like, "I'm not gonna tell you not to go," but he's like, that's what he said. "I'm not gonna tell you not to go," which in that sentence said so many different things. Right. And so I ended up going and ended up quickly realizing that this wasn't the best situation for me. Not that it was a bad choice, but just that, what they thought they wanted, they didn't understand that, and what I'm learning and what I'm doing doesn't really align with what I want to be doing. And so at that time, Alice was exiting a pretty toxic work relationship with a company that she was working at. And I approached her and I was like, "Hey, let's start our own studio." I was like, from grad school, I've learned the Jedi ways of human-centered design, right? I learned research methodologies, which the research methodologies in my mind really are only as valuable as what you bring to the table. But then going to the advertising world, what really happened was I learned how to sell ideas, right? I learned how to then use that research to package and sell ideas. And so I approached Alice and said, "Hey, let's start a studio where at least we can start to have more control over our relationship to work, where we can start to add value in the communities that we want to add value and how we want to actually focus that." And so
I'm sorry not to interrupt, but I'm wondering what you found at Open Box that spoke to you, spoke to your identity, spoke to a kind of future way of working that is somehow still part of the DNA of Deem today. Because obviously there was this moment where, you met Marquise and there must have been ideas there and a kind of philosophy or way of working. And maybe Marquise, you can jump in when you like, but that appealed to you and in a sense created this sense of mentorship that you didn't find in other creative spaces.
Yeah, I think from the foundation of it was the intention, right? The intention of how OpenBox approached working with institutions, communities, and really from the standpoint of how do we add value to a community, right? Like, what is that? And so at that moment, I'm in grad school going through all these theoretical frameworks, right? And the frameworks are just frameworks until you actually have a purpose for them, until you actually bring intention to them. And it wasn't until like I was a fellow at Open Box, I was like, oh, okay, here's how this can manifest in an actual way that, that people can engage with, that actually has a result besides here's a grade, or you passed, or your classmates didn't follow through.
So Marquise, at that time, when New talks about how projects were, or how concepts were being manifested at Open Box, what kinds of work were you guys doing that spoke to this idea of human-centered design, or design for people, or at least hinted at the beginnings of social practice for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it was always about our approach and intention as well. And regardless of the types of clients we work with, you know, we wanted to make sure that the research that we were doing was research based on engaging with real people in their social setting, and understanding that people make decisions not just based on individual needs, they make decisions based on their social needs, and even deeper than that, a lot of their cultural needs as well. And our ability to bring together lots of different individuals who understand those cultural differences was always been important to us. And you know, I think that the challenge with design in many ways is that it's fallen in love with itself and the output. And you see a lot, which is, you know, we'll get back to the magazine, but you know, it's why it's really important that we really focus on the process and the social interactions that we have that are an output of what we see, but that's not the most important. The most important thing is how we're engaging with each other. And so it was always important for us at Open Box to establish that early.
I think that Alice said something in Deem, which is quite telling to me about the kind of depth of what you're trying to do, and what makes it different with the journal and with the platform. This idea that there are spaces within spaces. And in most cases, right, we have this sort of monolithic view of a culture, of a people, of a neighborhood, of a city, and to go deeper to what is truly an authentic experience or relationship with your client, or with the people that you're quote unquote researching, right?
Yeah,
is what I feel like may have laid the groundwork for this idea of social practice.
That's
so,
right.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, New, when you and Alice started the Room for Magic out on the West Coast, what was it that you wanted to bring to the practice that maybe, I don't know, was somehow original in terms of your process and your way of working, that may not have been completely, you know, in practice at Open Box at the moment?
Well, both Alice and I come from a background that includes a lot of brand work. So working for brands, big brands like Red Bull, sneaker brands, like different brands that were always based around driving desirability, right? And even the clients that I would work for, whether it's Apple, like it was always around creating value in these inanimate objects. But really where the source of value came from was the communities that they engaged with. And what would usually happen is that a brand would say, we want to work with kids in Compton, and we're going to grab, let's say if it's Sprite, we're going to grab LeBron James and throw a basketball court in Compton and call it a day, right? And there was never, ever any dialogue with the community, or really meaningful dialogue with the community. And so where we really found our sweet spot, because we're like, well, brands and institutions and nonprofits are still going to engage with communities. What we want to do is be the in-between point to help to translate and bring the right people to the table to actually have an equitable dialogue. And so with that,
that's good. No, that's really good, because this idea of bringing people to the table, right? I mean, this is a metaphor that, you know, we understand our community quite well. Looking for a place at the table, let's say, in many cases, but then also giving them an opportunity to speak, right? This idea of an equitable space. So that, in many ways, the journal is also trying to do that, right? I don't know, are we showing the slides yet? Maybe it's a good opportunity to move into the journal. Okay, so the word deem means to regard or consider in a specified way. And just for our audience sake, I know that in one of these slides, you guys or an image that I saw before, you've crossed out consider in a specified way and added,
Yeah.
in, I believe.
Yeah.
So,
If you keep going. Right, that one. So what's interesting here is that when we first started building the brand, right, we wanted to give ourselves some pillars and North Stars. And one of the processes that we went through was naming the publication. And so even in naming the publication, we did a series of workshops in New York, in LA, brought together a gamut of different people, whether they were actual designers, whether they were artists or community organizers, to try to like crowdsource some great names. And then you had Alice and Marquise and I coming together and stewing on about like 5 different names. And one of them that stood out was Deem, right? And so what happened is that now as we're sitting there with these names, we started to actually look at like, what is the definition of Deem, right? So to guard and considered in a specified way. And we're like, oh, that's design, right? That's the goal of design, and also the goal of what we want people to do, to take a moment to stop the things that they already know for them to actually consider and reconsider. And as we started to mature the brand, and even though like we had, let's say, our year anniversary just passed, that year anniversary is from when we launched a public facing site with stories. But this was from like maybe 2 years ago of us talking through this. So as we started revisiting our pillars, one of the main pillars is our name. And as we've matured more, we're like, okay, well, is it really that we want people to reconsider in a specified way? And what we really found is that we really want people to reconsider with intention, right? And so we decided that for us, we're gonna update this definition to be able to align more with where we're at and what we want the reader to take away.
Yeah, that makes me wonder, I mean, in a sense, who is the reader in your minds? Who is the audience, right? I mean, it's a very radical decision to start a magazine at at a time. I mean, maybe it wasn't this time, maybe it was a couple of years ago when you first had the idea, but even then, right, magazines were, let's say, not necessarily on the uptick. So who is the audience that you're really thinking about here? And then what are you trying to kind of actually deem into practice?
Yeah.
Right?
You know, I would say that for us, the audience is anyone that wants to go deeper into stories. They want to actually see the evidence. And, you know, there's 2 reasons why we started the magazine. So I had another magazine that I was a part of years before Deem. It's called Makeshift Magazine. I really loved Makeshift. And
yeah, I remember Makeshift.
Yeah. So I was, you know, heavily involved in Makeshift as an investor and a partner, and we helped to redesign it. And so I knew that it was something important to have, something of depth. But what's really key for us is showing evidence as well. So you have the digital platform, which is great, but particularly important for us is making sure that there's a tangible evidence of the thinking and the doing, and allowing people to go deeper. You can only go so deep in digital. Obviously, you can go down rabbit holes, but a lot of times you can get lost. I love the fact that when we look at Deem Journal, right now it says issue 1. But I hope that over the years, you come back to it as a library of resources. So you don't look at it as much as a numerical order of when things came out, but more sources of resource that you can pull from your shelf to go in depth. And so obviously we didn't know that COVID would happen. We didn't obviously know that George Floyd and all those things would happen.
Yeah, it's incredibly timely.
But we knew that this moment of tangibility and this moment of people needed something to hold on to, that they can you know, curl up next to coffee and a fireplace and be able to read, and not just a snapshot of a moment, but more in depth. I don't know if you want to add.
Yeah, and I would say, especially for the audience, it was this mix, right? And there's two intentions with the mix. There is practitioners, so people who identify as designers. And the goal there was to have them reconsider their intentions with their design and how they approach design. And then on the other end, in which this is just as important to us and maybe even more important, is people who don't identify as designers. Because part of the goal, right, I think it's the previous slide, is to democratize design. And what does that really mean to us? That really means that as we were considering and looking at the world of design, we realized that when most people think of design, they think of outputs, like Marquise said, right? So they think of graphic design, industrial design, right? They don't think of design as this overarching process that leads to an output. And so that's why we rather focus on the process as opposed to the output, because what tends to happen is that when you think about the output gets actually filtered through a lens of fidelity, right? Fidelity, the ability you have between what you thought about and what you manifest. But when we talk about fidelity and we think about fidelity, all that really is resources. What resources do you have in order to bring this concept to life in this high fidelity? And that resources could be education, money, time, capital, all these things, right? And once you start thinking about that, that kind of becomes a barrier to people actually considering, oh, this work that I'm doing is a framework or it is design. Well, they don't think that because it's not of a certain fidelity that we've all been trained to believe equates to design. And so for us, we're like, well, if we detach design from the output, if we detach design from fidelity, a lot more people who aren't designers, who don't identify themselves as designers, can start to see themselves in the opportunity to have design-based conversations and design-based dialogue, which then will actually yield more empowering and start to create. That's how we want to create the space for people to enter into this conversation.
Yeah, that's why I think it's so powerful that your cover and the first issue features Adrian Marie Brown, because, I mean, as a kind of activist, community organizer, as a facilitator, let's say, you're equating design with community action. Obviously, Adrian Marie Brown is much more than a facilitator. I mean, she's a big thinker. Her book, Emergent Strategies, is a kind of, cult manifesto for how to transform your life, how to be more connected, let's say, to your community, to the work that
and
do.
And the interesting thing is that, I'm originally from the Midwest, and, people ask me about my background and how did I get into this. And for me, I realized that I had always been doing this type of work. So I'm a practitioner that's too old to have gone to a design school that we have today, right? And so it's like, how do you actually get into the practice? And then I realized, being from the Midwest, watching my grandparents and uncles work at steel mill and auto plants, and then come home and the neighbor would say need their car fixed, and seeing how everyone would come together to start fixing their car and start sharing back and forth. So there's this expression of sharing tools, sharing ideas of how to fix something, that I realized a few years ago. I was like, oh, I've been doing design. I've been watching my grandparents do this design. They fixed when something broke. I grew up at a time when something broke, you fixed it yourself.
Yeah.
Right? You didn't just throw it away and be like, okay, I just go get the next iPhone. You fixed it. Now today we can't fix, there's nothing that we can truly fix. And so I understood that within the social practice, what are the things that we can actually fix and control that still builds from this practice of community and engaging around the solution.
Yeah, I mean, in essence, what we can fix and control is our relationship to each other.
That's right.
And I like the way that the magazine doesn't really divide or separate audience from, let's say, who's featured in the magazine. And so the people that the stories that you're telling and the overarching narrative is about the audience seeing themselves quite literally in the magazine. So these are people who okay, I think you have one formal architecture studio featured, and you have Milton Curry, of course, the dean of USC Graduate School of Architecture, featured. But for the most part, I think, especially in the story of Adrian Marie Brown, right, you feature someone who may not have been thinking about themselves as a designer, right?
Yeah.
The idea of designing society and designing human interactions and designing, especially at a moment like now, right, designing transformative action in our communities, I think is really important.
Yeah, I was gonna add that it wasn't until we flew to Detroit and sat with her for over like 6 hours during the shoot that she said, "Oh, wait a minute, I guess I am a designer," right? She never really saw her work as design. She never really saw her manifestos as design frameworks. And I think it was really in that dialogue with her that she saw like that the light bulb like went off to us, that we're like, okay, our intentions are being reached, right? Like what our hypothesis is actually something that's coming to fruition, and we don't even have to be explicit about it. It just makes sense when we're talking to, especially to her. So.
Right. And I mean, her work is very much about empowerment. And I just want to mention something that Alice commented on in the magazine. She says that she would like your readers to be able to see Deem as a space or place of empowerment. And the relationship to how we talk about architecture and design in an academic sense as spaces and places, right? And how she would like the readers to see the journal as a space or place of empowerment. To allow themselves to see them being part of the design world.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, how does Deem go about creating spaces of empowerment for its readers? I mean, how is the magazine or the platform actually a place of empowerment, and how do you assess the success of that?
I mean, I'll start off by saying, the first and most important thing for us is that people see themselves in the magazine, right? And I think that the challenge with everything that's going on, when you think about Black Lives Matter, what they're really saying is that I need you to see me, and I need you to see that I matter the same way that you see yourself. And when I walk down the street, when I go into furniture stores, when I go into, any type of a shop, I don't see myself. I don't see the thought process that went into making something that touches me. And what we want this magazine to do is that when you walk into a store, that this magazine pulls you in and it says, oh, I belong here. This is me. This is my community. And empowers you to say, ooh, let me dive into this. And you put it down and you start with action. So it's a provocation. It's really helping to provoke people to take action in their own self and step into their own greatness as well, because they can see themselves the same way that we saw ourselves up in the source in hip hop magazines, and how hip hop has transferred us in regards to our thinking and being about ourselves. We believe that design is just as powerful in regards to its own platform as well.
No, of course. I mean, design is essentially the tool of progress in contemporary culture. So to understand that it goes beyond just having a smartphone and promoting oneself, but into a kind of deeper understanding of your relationship to other people in society. And I think in America, this is a very, let's say, difficult territory to navigate, right? To understand your role in society as a kind of obligation to others, to be of service to others, and not just be in this kind of survival mode where you're just getting by on your own, right? I mean, in essence, the way that the three of you have come together and the kinds of stories that you're trying to tell, I think speaks to that.
Yeah. Did you have anything to add to that?
No, I was just gonna actually build off of that point of survival mode. I always equate how, especially marginalized communities, Black communities, we operate from the defense, right? we operate from the defense because we're trying to gain traction to then be able to move into offense. And we're not in offense yet, but design is one of the methods that we will be able to start to pivot away from defense. Because the reason why a designer like Dieter Rams can come up with 10 design principles is because he's not operating from the defense, right? Like they're already on the offense where they have the space and time and resources to think in these ways. Whereas like for us, like there's moments where we have to think a bit more practical. We have to think, this car is broken. How are we going to fix it? Not what is the theory of movement when it comes to putting together mechanics to fix a car, right?
Yeah,
Right.
no, absolutely. And I've always argued that, from different executives at large design firms, that is this really design, right? I mean, you imagine what would jazz be without Miles and Coltrane? Would it still be jazz? So when you have missing people in a very large genre of design, and you have missing voices, is it really design? And I argue that we are still exploring what design means, because there's a whole movement that has not been a part of this. And until we actually infect design with individuals who are working from a different side of the offense and the defense, we're not truly going to see the power of this work. The same thing with art. I mean, you think about, you remove all people of color, and particularly Black people, out of music. What does it sound like? Right?
Well, I think,
yeah.
Sure. No, of course. I mean, I like to think about it as giving people access, right? I mean, in essence, those companies that don't speak to certain audiences aren't really giving them access to, I guess, be dignified in a sense, right?
Absolutely. But also,
there's no conversation really that they're having directly.
Right. But it's also making sure that our practice, I mean, there's one of the important goals that I have is to make this practice stronger. We need Adrian Marie Browns to infect the design practice. We need her voice, right?
Sure.
And it's going to make us better as designers when we're bringing in her voice. So it's not just for her. It's great that we can help to empower her and get her a platform, but it's really important for us to be able to bring those voices in a dignified manner, not just sprinkling in as design, excuse the expression, but design porn, where you just have these sound bites of cool kids doing cool things, and you see them in a design magazine, but they're not elevated in the consciousness and really elevated their practice and process as on par with what you believe design is from the academia.
Yeah, and even I was gonna say to add to that, that was even part of the approach of even the actual visual communication language that we put together for the publication, right? Because part of that was like from Alice and I's background and my background specifically of driving desirability, right? So the question was like, how can we drive desirability around social and community change? And so the lens of Deem is always from a community level. It's always from that level of people who may not have that opportunity. So even with the shoot with Adrian Marie Brown, like we went all out in a scrappy way, but we approached it like, okay, well, how can we try to build a elevated, eloquent platform that can allow us to see ourselves to our fullest extent, right? That things that we usually don't get the opportunity. So one of the beautiful things is on the cover, that's Adrian Marie Brown in her backyard, right? Yeah. It's her in her backyard. And we did 3 or 4 different looks with her. This specific one was the most casual, and this one was not meant to actually be a look. It was just, we were in the studio, we were shooting, we had the makeup artist going, we had a couple of different looks. And then I was like, let's go outside. I was like, what would happen if we go outside? And then she's like, well, we have these looks. And I'm like, well, what else would you wear? I was like, put on a t-shirt. And she's like, oh, I have this t-shirt that I love and this skirt. And we're like, okay, cool. And we went outside and just shot a couple of shots. And I remember Alice being like, this one's probably not gonna this is not going to make it into the magazine. And I was like, I don't know. I was like, let's see. And when we got the photos back, we were like, oh, this is it. I was like, this is her in her natural state, being herself in her backyard.
Well, I mean, in so many ways, those pictures and throughout the magazine and that story are so refreshing because they speak to the authenticity of of your effort here in the journal, and they also speak to diversity, right? I mean, how often do we see a woman that looks like Adrian Marie Brown on the cover of a magazine? It's not about showing any kind of social ideal, but it's about showing who she really is.
That's right.
I appreciate that. So I wanted to get at the idea of the platform, though, and you know, a journal is already this project biannual, but then to have it also be a platform, and when I say platform, right, the word platform is kind of tossed around quite a lot these days.
Yeah.
Apart from placing the journal online and making it accessible online, how else does the platform operate to kind of have an interactive dialogue with your audience?
Yeah. So one of the core pillars for us is also that design is a shared experience, right? Everyone experiences design. And so for us, pre-COVID, one of our main goals was, okay, well, how do we bring this to life for people and make this into a practice and make this tangible? And one of the ways that we've been approaching doing that is workshops, right? Being able to actually host workshops with different practitioners in the publication. Next week, we're going to announce some series of workshops. If Alice was here, she'd be so mad, but she's not here. So, but that's how we want to bring it. That's how we want to bring the platform from just being a tangible artifact, in which Marquise mentioned, like, it's important for us to document and have a volume of work that can be referenced as a research manuscript. But then also now, like, how do we take it down to the actual tangible level? And through that, workshops, panel discussions, and prior to COVID, we had an entire road show that included LA, New York, Detroit, Chicago, going overseas, like trying to find different opportunities to take the people, the ideas, the concepts that are in the pages, and then actually start to bring that to life. And then in that, we really wanted to start to engage with our community and hear back from them. Because it's one thing for us to ideate, think about a concept, bring it to fruition, but it's a whole nother beast once it's out of our hands. And then it's in the hands of someone like you, someone who's able to, like, even contextualize it to the point that we're like, oh, yeah, I guess we did.
Maybe we can go to the next slide. I wanted to ask, I know that you did some type of an event online already. I saw something in your Instagram with Mold magazine as well.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. And so I think it's Lin Yi that you were in dialogue with. So is this an example of one of the kinds of workshops that you're speaking about? And can you go into detail about what you discussed there?
Yeah, so that was with Space 10 out of Copenhagen. And it was a conversation with Lin Yi that was focused on designing for dignity and practices of care. So practices of care is one of her main pillars that she is developing more into her practice and her publication. And then for us, being able to then interface that with designing for dignity. And so the conversation really acted as like a foundational manifesto for both of our platforms, with Mold Magazine focusing on the design and the future of food. And we also featured her on our digital publication as well. And so where it really led us to, and this was like right at the beginning of a lot of the Black Lives Matter, like, resurgence and energy. So it really started to look at, well, where does dignity play a space in the design community when it comes to interfacing with the 3 points that we were focusing on, like co-living, hyperlocal food systems, and even thinking about architecture outside of the built environment. And so that conversation like went into many different directions, but I think it was a good opportunity for us to at least start testing more like our audience in terms of what they engage with. And that, like, we had so many people who were just very excited to say, hey, like, even the fact that you hosted this platform incited me, or even just like this specific aspect of when you compared design and where does design like interface with white supremacy, like going into conversations like that where people are like, oh, you never really hear those type of nuanced conversations within a design dialogue. And that's what happens when you detach design from an output of design, and you can like focus on the actual process
Sure,
around it.
sure. So where are those conversations visible to anyone that's listening or to your audience?
Yeah,
Can
I think
go back and listen to that?
Yeah, I think the best place is if you follow us on Instagram. On our Instagram, we usually pin the highlights of a lot of those conversations and also some of our media. And then if you go to our site, and in our Instagram, we have a link tree that works very well as like an archive of those type of things.
Okay, okay. I mean, it almost sounds like in these workshops, you're offering not just an opportunity for discussion, but let's call them tools for activating change or making change. And I think in this moment of protest, where all of us as designers have to be thinking about what does design as protest look like, design for protest. Is design involved in these protests? Of course, we can all go out and physically, march, but what else can we be doing? And so I think maybe Alice again mentioned the idea of tools and how people might use them to affect their design communities. And I'm thinking about the work of the scholar Hilary Mawson and community land trusts, for example. I think there was an example like that where, obviously these are, I don't want to call it insider knowledge, but in a sense, right, there's a lot of academic knowledge there that you're trying to communicate at the community levels to get people involved from a design perspective. So,
yeah, and it's an interesting idea, because I had a long conversation with my dad a couple of weeks ago where he was a little frustrated with like Black Lives Matter and what are they doing, and getting organized. And I had to remind him, I go, look, this younger generation, they're tired of the brick and mortar organizations. Doesn't mean that we don't respect organizations like the NAACP and others that are formal, but what they are doing is actually creating a movement, not an organization. And there is organizing tools, self-organizing, that allow people to go out and affect their neighborhood, their moment, versus one top-down organization that's trying to create this uniform way of living and pushing the agenda forward. And I'm excited that Deem can serve as one of those tools within the movement, because people want to see action. They're tired of just creating another organization that continues to raise money and to hire an executive director for us all to wait for them to tell us what we need to do. When I am being affected in my neighborhood right now on my block, and it's different than your block, what do? Give me the tools so that I can go do it myself.
Right.
That's a big part of what the journal is all about, is bringing these ideas from across the globe into a place where we can start to have these better dialogues, versus us trying to create something or that's just going to be this, I don't know, after you're done with it, you're done with it. Like, it's not relevant. I mean, we want to make sure that this is a living document. Yeah,
the idea of action also goes back to the work of Adrian Marie Brown, right? And emergent strategies. So it's interesting that was a kind of model, I think, or inspiration for you for Deem Journal. She was not just an author, she was not just a thinker, but she was an activist and she was an organizer and she was a facilitator. And so the way her work from the intellectual to the community took action is a very obvious model for how Deem is working. So this can we go forward a few slides to maybe talk about this idea of Afrofuturism a little bit. So because we start to think about our communities organizing and our communities trying to affect systemic change, we can't really get past the idea that we have to see a future for ourselves where we're safe, right? Where we have the ability to engage in the conversation and make change happen. So, I mean, you've been inspired by and highlighted her work, really ahead of its time, and her work is very much influenced by Octavia Butler, right?
Yeah.
And obviously, emergent strategies is, like I said before, one of these classics of kind of how to move forward in your community. But then you've also, in the issue, brought attention to the Black Space Urbanist Collective, for example, which is engaged in recording histories in Black communities of places and spaces where we feel safe, where we can have dialogue with one another, where we can build community. And these are unofficial spaces, but they're very interesting. So, and I love that piece, by the way. And then, of course, there's Ingrid Lafleur, who's the curator and also a friend of mine.
She's great.
And Ingrid curated an exhibition in Detroit, which was deeply rooted in Afrofuturism. In fact, Ingrid ran for mayor on the platform of Afrofuturism. And so, you know, I'm wondering, I mean, I was at Harvard last year, and I went to the Black in Design conference, which was called Black Futures. I think Black Futurism, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And I'm just, you know, obviously I'm a designer and I'm a Black designer, but I'm a little bit unclear now as to what exactly do we mean when we talk about Afrofuturism. And I'd really like to understand how, for you, Afrofuturism relates to social practice.
Yeah. So I was also at the conference as well, and I was at the one prior. And so there was two moments, well, there's like a couple of different moments where Afrofuturism really showed up in my life. I mean, from Octavia Butler, Alice being a huge Octavia Butler fan and just having that rooted in a lot of our dialogue, but then also like loving the sci-fi aspect of it. But it wasn't until my last year of grad school and I took a futuring class, right? And I was like, huh, futuring. I remember
that's an interesting word.
Right. Yeah, right. It's like so and so as I sat in that class, right, I'm like, the foundational theory is that if you're able to build models and think about a desired future, you're more apt to actually land closer to that desired future, right?
Absolutely.
And so there's all these frameworks in order to do that. And as I'm sitting in this class, I'm just thinking to myself, like, wow, I am the only Black person in this class. I'm like, huh. I was like, it dawned on me. I was like, wait a minute. We're talking about futures, right? We're talking about futures. And I was like, wait, we don't really get the opportunity to really talk and think about our future, right? Usually what starts to happen is that we are chained literally to our past. And it's our past that informs our present and that continues towards our future. So fast forward when I was at the Black in Design conference, not the last one, but the previous one, I forgot who was presenting, but it was a Black architecture studio. And I remember seeing a rendering, and it dawned on me that that was the first time I had ever seen a rendering that featured Black people, that predominantly featured Black people. And then I started thinking, like, as I was sitting there, I was like, wow, the idea of when architecture studios are putting together renderings to pitch this idea, and even in their concepting of this imaginary place, it does not include Black people. It blew my mind. And so I went on this journey to find, like, okay, well, is there resources for stock imagery that include people of color, that include Black people? And of course, I knew I was going to land on an article. I landed on an article that pretty much said that there isn't. People have started creating these resources so that students can then start to implement them. And so then what really happened was that Afrofuturism stopped being this thing that was years out and was really became much more present to me. So as much as Afrofuturism is about the future, it's also about the present, because it's about our ability to start thinking about what do we want our near future to be? How can we design and start to create a future that is affirming and that makes sense for us? And you see a lot of that rooted in Deem. So not just from the most abstract, like sci-fi approach to Afrofuturism, but like the actual tangible, well, here are things that are affecting us right now, and here are tools that we can use to start to build towards the future that we want.
Yeah.
Right. How do we envision ourselves in the future? What does the process look like to get there?
Yeah, no, and and I'll add to that is that we also understand the history of erasing us, right? And so if you understand the history of trying to erase us, then the understanding of Black future starts to come evident, right? And so if you think about the history books here, particularly in the States, that basically not included us in any of the conversations, the statues, and for me, what also really resonated, and my brother Abdul is on. I know he didn't know I was going to say what's happening. I see you, brother. He's in Denmark right now. I believe he's in Denmark, where he lives, but he's from South Africa, and we spent a lot of time in South Africa. And for me, that was just another awakening of understanding what it looked like to be erased.
Yeah.
Try to be erased and coming back. And what does that actually mean? And so Afrofuturism in South Africa is so like right there in your face, and understanding what does it mean for me to now step in to that moment and say that I exist. And not only do I exist, I'm going to show you the process of my evidence. And that's what designing for this idea of dignity is meaning for us as well, is that I want to live a dignified life. Who am I? I want to own what you say and how you say about who I am.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I want to tell my story because I don't see my story in the buildings, in the things that are being made. Therefore, the process to which you got there is broken.
It's very interesting too. And the fact that this billboard, I mean, I love this. This is so provocative and powerful. There are Black people in the future. That a statement like that has to be said, has to be put on a billboard to be understood, right? And so when we look at how the Black art world has made such progress through a lot of work around identity, right?
Yeah.
Around placing us in these artistic spaces where we didn't belong, or quote unquote didn't have access to, let's say. Now we see a movement of young designers, and not so young, like you and I, Marquise, that are building bodies of work that are examining design and design process as a way of imagining our future. And that's incredibly powerful. I guess we should get to the probably the last question. I think your statements, Marquise, were a great transition into the very eloquent description of social practice by USC Dean of Architecture, Milton Curry. The way you end the magazine with Milton, I thought was perfect. Nu, I'd like to ask you one of the important questions that you asked him. And I think we've already touched upon it, but maybe into a little more detail. Why do you think at this particular moment in time, there's such a pedagogical shift here in the US towards engagement, socially engaged practices, let's say?
Yeah, I mean, even to give you context, even to give you context, like that piece was actually available on digital first. We did it as a digital piece, but as we were laying out the publication, we felt like it was such a powerful interview with him that it deserved to also be adapted into print. And so really that question that I was asking him was really around the idea of, okay, well, why now? Why is everyone shifting towards this more social, equitable, I guess, understanding of design and approach? And really, it was a loaded question. And he's such a witty person that like Alice was the one asking the serious questions, and I was just asking things that were coming to mind. Like she had everything written out, and really what it was what's driving this, and is it genuine? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Is this a genuine interest, or is this just is this part of the zeitgeist that every company, including a Pepsi, has to do an ad that's talking about social change, and really like, is this really like a opportunity for brands to co-op, right? And I know this from my experience sitting on like with clients, and where they're like, oh, well, we want to tell our brand narrative, and our brand narrative is tied to all these cultural movements that happen, and that's why we're at where we're at now. And usually what would happen is I would always say no, because those cultural movements were attached to people that actually faced oppression, and you did nothing for that oppression. You were just there. You were there, right, by proximity. And so really where we're at now, and it, like you said earlier, like all this, we've been working on this for like over 2 years. We launched digital, we launched print like in December, and now a lot of these things are coming around. Now a lot of these topics are like, it's timely, but it's timely because we wanted it to actually be evergreen.
Yeah.
Because these are things that we talk about and that we consider.
And I would, you know, the one thing that I would add to that as well is that it's also timely because similar to the COVID-19 virus, the things that we've created have no bounds of color, race, gender. You cannot oppress people of color, Black people, and particularly say education, and then not catch up with you. Right? Separate but equal has caught up with everybody else. Right? Food deserts have caught up with everyone else, where you see the poorest of white people now suffering the same things that Black people have been suffering. And so I think that part of it is, yes, people are really excited about this, and some of it is self-serving as well, which it's okay, because you need to wake up and say, you cannot affect the least of thee and not affect the greatest of thee. Everyone is being affected. COVID-19 doesn't care.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, you know, the fact that certain communities are affected.
Oh, no, of course. Oh, absolutely. Now, absolutely, because the frontline workers, so obviously.
There is no equality.
That's right. That's right. It's affecting everyone. Everyone can catch it. But to your point, yes, absolutely. We can see the evidence of the challenge within the system that people have not been addressing.
So I think what's really powerful about Deem, and then we'll open it up for questions, you guys, is that it directly confronts that inequality and attempts to promote the narratives and stories of people who are not only coming from that place of inequality, but also speaking to it and trying to kind of build their projects around it. Milton Kirby, a great example. Adrian Marie Brown, great example. Ingrid Lafleur and her work in Detroit, and on and on and on. And we know a lot more in our community who are also doing great work. So I'd love to open it up to questions. I don't know, I haven't been able to check the chat or who's actually with us and watching at the moment, but we'd love to hear from you. If there's anyone out there with any questions for Marquise and New from Deem.
You want to put down the presentation so we can go back to the other grid?
Okay. It looks like Abdul Dubé. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Abdul, forgive me. Abdul's a friend of yours, right, Marquise?
Yeah.
Abdul, if you're here with us, would you like to ask the question directly?
Abdul's trying to get us in trouble.
Yeah.
I
mean, you opened up the box, so now I'm gonna try and get in. But I mean, is there any way of saying more of, because engagement in the workshop is really powerful, but like, I mean, is there a set curriculum? Is there set things that you're packing in there that you want people to experience?
Yes. And like I said, you're trying to get us in trouble because this is Alice is still, but
wait,
Okay,
is this a
just
planted
like a-
question? Is this a
I
planted?
don't know. So basically what we're planning on doing is diving into the 3 different touch points that's in the publication. So there will be a roundtable discussion around hyperlocal food systems that also has like an experimental like art output attached to it. There is also a pretty cool discussion around social architecture. So looking at architecture not from the built space, but more from how are people engaging and interacting within those spaces. And then there is another discussion around co-living, right? So as we start to move into this world that people are living longer, that there's food deserts, that we need to start to rethink how are we living together and how can we start to shape that to be affirming and in a dignified way and not just leave it up to the major corporations to start planning how they're going to push us all together and continue to redline us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great. Let me see if there are any more questions popping up in the chat, maybe ones that weren't planted. Let's see. Let me see. Well, when we talk about, we've touched upon a lot of very interesting resources and kind of broader community, just as the journal does. I think there's one new message here. Let me see what I can read. I'm wondering, besides your website and Instagram, are there any resources that you'd like to recommend? I mean, I know that I can speak to the Harvard Graduate School of Design Black in Design conferences are available online. I think through the Harvard GSD website. So that's really important. If people would like to go back and watch, because a lot of the formation of this, and I think is very powerful, came out of the student-led conference around how we're thinking about or applying these kinds of philosophies of Afrofuturism to architectural and design practice. We have a question from Alex. Alex, are you here with us? Would you like to ask that question directly?
Sure. Yeah, this is great. I can't wait to get my hands on issue 1, but I'm curious if you can share what the second topic will be, the topic for issue 2.
More trouble.
Alice would kill us.
You're not allowed to talk. I mean, you're coming here to talk to us all. So come on, you have to be able to share.
Well, I mean, we could, I don't think I'll say is that we know that it's going to be, again, an in-depth journal. We are still working through, the interviews and so we just want to be careful because we don't want to, the journal is driven not just by topics, it's driven by people who are expressing certain topics. We are here to help bring those things together. And so for us, we've always been very careful of trying to create these boxes, right? And so if you look at
Marquise, maybe you can speak to how, you're describing collaborators, right? I mean,
that's right.
Contributors are more like collaborators, and maybe you can speak to the process of how you guys are gathering and developing ideas for the new issue.
Yeah, I mean, and
so,
go ahead. You take that.
No, I was just gonna say the process that we usually take is we start off with a hypothesis, right? And so even with the first issue, Designing for Dignity, like even though it doesn't have a question mark at the end of it, really that's what it is. It's like Design for Dignity, right? Like,
what is that?
What is that?
Yeah.
What is dignity? Who gets to quantify and qualify dignity? Who's on the receiving end? Who's on the producing end? How do we start to approach that? So usually it starts with that type of hypothesis that we set out to at least move closer to an understanding. We never want to put ourselves in the position where we're like, we're the authority and we're going to answer this question. It's like, no, we want to get closer to that. And as getting closer to that, we want to bring as many people along with us as possible and pull in as many different perspectives as possible. There are limitations. There's only 148 pages that we're printing. And so we can't like pull in every point of view, but I think that's what digital allows us to do as well. And I guess to answer your question, and else would be fine, I think the second issue is going to circle around this idea of pedagogy.
So your hypothesis, quote unquote, is pedagogy question mark, and then the community comes together and interrogates pedagogy, and then initiates form. So I'm wondering, you know, if we're all part of this community now through design and dialogue, would you be open to people reaching out? People that are maybe
absolutely. I mean, we take this as a design approach every time we're working on an issue, and so we love collaborators. If you have ideas, if you have interest, please reach out to us on all the different platforms. I'm always open to that. And Steve, you know, I mean, that's how you and I have been engaging in the last few years, just kind of looking and seeing, and hopefully, you know, collaborating here in the near future. And I work with a lot of different artists and writers on lots of different projects. And so let's continue to make this a community. Even this forum, we really appreciate this forum. This is a community. So don't see this as a linear us sitting here talking and you just listening. We'd love for you to be a part of the conversation.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're going to share your email addresses in the chat with everyone.
It's all good.
I mean,
your personal mobile.
We're going
to put that in the chat. Well, listen, guys, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for joining us. Just in case you guys are still wondering, this is Deem Journal, issue number 1, Designing for Dignity. Please.
Hey, New, tell them how to get the magazine. And
if you go on deemjournal.com, the magazine is available, and we also are stocked in a couple of great stockists, including Tate Magazine, Mag Culture, if you're in Europe. We have our stockists up on the website as well.
Yeah, and if you have places in your neighborhood or places that do not stock us, let us know. We're always interested in making sure that we get everyone access to the magazine.
Yeah. You should be at Playground Coffee Shop in Bed-Stuy in Brooklyn.
Playground. Yeah, okay. Yes, no, we're working on that. Definitely.
Check it out. All right. He's already on it.
Yeah. I mean, the hard part is that not everyone is open right now. So we had a lot of conversations where people were like, yeah, we want to stock you. Then they're like, we're not sure if we're even going to be around in a month. So we're trying to be sensitive of that. So right now we're just trying to drive people to the digital platforms that the magazine is readily available.
Sure. Okay, guys. Thank you so much. This has been amazing.
You.
Appreciate your time and your.
Thank you.
All right.